So Ryan is busy at conferences, as you might expect. There's a lot of conferences going on this week, and so I will go ahead and get things started. As usual, we're gonna start off with some highlights. A lot has happened in the last few weeks. I think the last time that we met was on the 7th, I think. So it's been a few weeks. And there's a huge list of things that have gone in that are worth noting. So let's just run through those quickly. Oh, something happened and I lost it. Okay. So the first one, it's out of memory fix, Avro decoding, caching. I'm not sure exactly what the impact of that was, but good to get that fixed. Thank you very much. That was Connie. The next one, multiple shuffle partitions per file. I think this was largely to relieve some pressure on local storage when doing compaction operations. I don't know if Anton's here or somebody from Apple that can briefly talk to what that issue was. I can't see the full list of people right now. So, and Brian, do you think you could share the actual doc? Do you have that up? Or maybe I could do that. Okay. So I don't know if there's a way. The only thing I can see, Brian, is your note taker. Is there any way that we can?
Yeah, let me pull that up right now. Sorry.
I got the doc up and showing. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. At least in my view, it is shared with your note taker. So let's just. I don't know how they. There it is. 100%. Let's go 150. Okay. Okay, so it sounds like maybe nobody from Apple to speak to the shuffle partitions per file, but it looks like there's kind of setting that you can use in order to reduce the amount of local disk required during compaction operations. So it probably only affects you if you're working at very large sizes or if you're compacting files into very large output files. I think the example that he had given was 2 gigabytes or so. The next one, and there's a lot of work going on the Python side. So positional delete support. Fako, do you want to just briefly talk about where that stands? Does that include both the nominal deletes, the equality deletes, and positional deletes? Oh, I guess it's just positional deletes. Anything that people need to know at this point in terms of what's supported.
Yeah, good question, Dan. Yeah, so it's actually full positional deletes. So we decided to break it up a bit in separate PRs. So this is only the positional deletes. Equality deletes can go next, and it's only supported by arrow. And what we actually will do before, it would just throw an error if there was like a positional deletes, and now it will actually apply them, including like all the optimization. So to actually also use statistics to see like if it needs to be read and all these kind of things. So that we also reduce the number of calls to S3 and process as least as possible.
Okay, so that's good progress on that side. The next one is there's some initial work in terms of wrapping some changes in transactions on the Python side, which I think is partially in support of some of the future things that are coming. We'll talk about the multi-transaction or multi-table commits. Do you want to talk just briefly about what's included in the alter table statement support right now?
Yeah, so this is mostly about the API. So it's mostly about like how we're going to name the API. And it's actually all around. It's already like geared towards like also the multi-table commits. So we're already included it in like how we structure the classes. And today, the only thing that's possible is setting properties. But I think on tables, but I think that's a very important one. And what will follow next is like APIs to also do schema updates.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like And this may be a little bit of a deviation from what's currently in like the Java APIs. In the Python APIs, we're going to pretty much wrap everything within transactions, right? That's kind of the plan going forward for any sort of update you would wrap in a transaction. Is that right, Faka?
Yeah. So now you can start like from table transaction, stage a couple of changes, updates, and then commit them. And these are also following the path of the public REST API spec. Yeah, and then you could also create like a transaction on itself that actually affects like multiple tables. And if you then call the commit on it, it will actually do the multi-table commit. So I think that's the same API. It's you can use it for like tables, but also multiple tables. I think that's very nice.
Yep. So great progress there. So the next one is Edward, the view metadata implementation. So a lot of progress being made now on views, which is something that's been kind of out there for a little while, and I think we're working hard to drive forward on those implementations. So maybe Edward, if you just want to give a brief summary of like where that is, I think we've got the metadata implementation in, and we've got a number of follow-ups. If you want to just kind of walk people through what that looks like.
Yeah, sure. So like Dan said, the metadata implementation is in. I also opened a PR last week that adds the remaining pieces that we need for view support. And that PR also adds basic support for the in-memory catalog. And then there's one additional PR to support views at the REST layer. And that's basically the plan that we're currently following.
So as things stand, like we've got the kind of the first iteration of the Vue APIs in, the core implementation, and then we've got a few other things that are coming along, like the catalog integrations, and then we have the engine integrations that we'll need to work through as well. So the Spark integration, as well as looking at other engines, Trino, or anything else that we think will probably need to support views. Do you have any comments on that, Edward?
Yeah, so engine integrations is a big part, right? Like we would need to add support for Trino and Spark, and like anyone interested in that would be, really great. But yeah, the basic plan is like adding the remaining pieces of the APIs, and then also do the engine integration.
And I'm also, Jack, actually, you go first because you actually raised your hand.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to thanks for pushing this forward. I think I was out for a few weeks for different conferences, and Amok was also out. So I think we are both back at this moment, so we should be able to help you get all the remaining things down. And for the engine side, we actually have a internal patch for the Trino one, so we can think offline about how we want to merge that. For the Spark side, I think John from Netflix has that patch, but we were having some hard time getting time to merge that. So we can also see what's the best way to do it.
Yeah, when we get to the engine integration, definitely syncing up with Netflix and John would be helpful. I think that there's still kind of an outstanding question. There may be a couple small pieces that need to get upstream in Spark, but I think once we actually have everything underlying it ready, that'll make it a lot easier to kind of push forward with those APIs. Because right now it's unclear if anything is going to need to change in that. So, Brian.
Yeah, so Jack, just to be, so you have support already for multi-table transactions for Trino, or that was something else you were saying?
No, I mean views.
Oh, for views. Okay, got it. Okay.
And Jack, is that like a kind of an internal working version based on the APIs that are already in Iceberg, or is that something separate at this point?
So it was based on the old version of the core support that John put out.
Okay.
But I mean the stack it hasn't changed too much, so it should still work.
So Jack, for that one as well, just reach out to me whenever you're needing to get things pushed in the Trino side. I'm happy to help get things like moving if anything ever gets stagnant there. And I'm happy to bug people nonstop on that side. So for views, and then is there any work that AWS or anybody else who was on the call who has started looking into the multi-table transaction stuff that Edward's worked on in regards to like using it for?
Yeah, I think I had some offline discussions with Edward, but we want to wait for Ryan to have some further discussions. So
Okay.
So that's actually the next topic here. So why don't we just jump into that one? The first PR is for the multi-table commits, and the way that we're kind of approaching it is breaking up the multi-table transaction problem into one, just getting the actual commit and the APIs and REST spec for how do we do multi-table commits out there, and that commit doesn't mean full transaction support. It just means like all the tables will be updated or they will not be updated. That actually covers a number of use cases that people have for ETL as well as like WAP pattern and audits and things like that, where they want to do some amount of validation and then like move everything forward or leave everything in its current state. And you don't want to end up in some kind of mixed state where some of them committed and some of them didn't. So that's a pretty common problem. Rajesh, did you want to jump in? I saw you had your hand up there briefly.
Yeah, no, I just want to say like I'm interested in that because like we were looking into that as well from Netiza integration point of view.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the first step is going to be like what Edward has up here, which is kind of the multi-table commit, and we'll go through any remaining pieces of that. And then it's actually figuring out like the APIs and the validations that are required for the multi-table transactions to ensure that we have the correct isolation levels validated for any sort of commits that are going through in that space. So I think that, Edward, do you have any updates in terms of like where we are in kind of thinking and review? There is a doc that I think we linked to last time.
Yes, there is a doc, and right now the outstanding PR, which is still in draft, is the one that defines the higher level catalog transaction API, so that so right now we have the API to support like multi-table commits, but it's difficult to work with them because we don't have this higher level API where you start a catalog transaction and then anything that you do in that time frame or like whatever you do participates in that transaction. And this is part of this outstanding PR, and is also what is being discussed in the design doc. So yeah, once we wrap up view support, we will get back to that remaining pieces of the catalog transaction API.
Yeah, and Brajesh, in terms of like from your standpoint, I don't know if you need that full implementation or how much you're relying on the Java APIs for it, but like at least the multi-table commit would allow some amount of work potentially if you're working with external catalogs. But I would definitely look at the doc, and if you have any feedback on those things, that would definitely be helpful. The more eyes we can get on this, the better.
All right, awesome, thank you. I'll look into that. If someone can provide me the doc, or is there?
Yeah, I think last time actually, if you just scroll down a little bit in the docs from 6.7, there's a link off to the multi-table transactions doc.
I think it should also be in the PR itself.
Okay. I'll look into that. Thank you.
Okay. So again, like this one is purely for the multi-table commits. And that's just kind of the first step forward and getting the API spec and everything else. That'll likely be reused. The main thing is that we don't have the validations and other pieces to ensure the full transactional behavior of all of the operations underneath that transaction. Brian?
I'd also just like to take a second to gauge if there's any interest from either you, Jack, or anybody else who has who has worked on Trino, if there's any interest there, because I'm trying to I've talked about it with a couple of the folks on that side, and they're probing right now for interest on Starburst, but we're also curious anywhere else that there might be some interest there. So Jack, is that something that you all like on the AWS side might be interested in implementing?
For the multi-table transaction, So technically, today in the Trino Iceberg connector, there is already certain level of guarantee for multi-transaction, because it stores the table metadata separately and evolves that metadata before actually doing the commit.
But
So,
there's no transaction semantics though, correct?
correct.
So okay, yeah.
So this definitely is going to simplify that workflow, and we can see how to incorporate this. But there was one point I raised regarding the read isolation guarantees.
Yeah.
If we can work that out, I think it will be it will help with integration. Yeah.
So I spoke to Martin about it. He's interested, and so I think if we can get like either one or both Starburst and Athena teams working on this, that would be great. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that definitely has a fair amount of discussion still for the actual multi-table transactions. So we'll continue to bring this up in future meetings. I don't think it's something that's going to land immediately, and we'll have a lot of opportunity to kind of review things like the isolation levels. I would take a look at the doc, Jack, because I think a lot of the enforcement of like drift and read isolation, it really comes down to how we do the validations and what we're enforcing during the actual commit phase. So I believe that we've addressed most of those, but if there are questions, we can definitely spend some more time digging into it. Let's see. The next one that we have here, I think Peter had added this. Looks like on the Flink side, improved support for ensuring ordered operations or ordered read from Iceberg tables. Making sure that like when slope planning happened, you aren't getting out of order, out of order reads from the snapshots. And so I think that they're using sequence numbers. So I'm not sure what that means for like V1 tables, but it looks like with at least V2 tables, you can use that to force some ordering. I don't know, is Peter here? I didn't see him jump in. Stephen Wu, I'm not sure if he's here either. So we probably don't have anybody who can give any more insight into that one. And the last one, Brian, you put this on the agenda. Did you want to talk to that briefly?
Yeah, so I just wanted to update everyone here that's at least on the call, and then we'll obviously have these in the notes. We're gonna go away from like having to be subscribed to the dev list to get onto this meeting in particular, as well as like other meetings, because I just wanted there to be kind of a place where we will showcase all of the Iceberg events moving forward. And particularly these community sync will be the main thing initially, but we'll figure out as we go on like how to add other things there as well. And effectively, I want to have like it to where it's basically no invite needed. You just go to the calendar. We'll try to get that maybe included on the website at some point so that anybody hopping on there can go check it out, or maybe be under the community page or something. And then basically that's where you'll find a link here, and it'll just be either an open Zoom link or open Google Meet link that can basically pull in anybody. I'm already using my own recording thing, so it can be on kind of either of those two. Does anybody have questions about that in terms of how it'll work? You don't have to get invited anymore. Basically, you'll just go. There'll be a link there, and you'll just click on it and join that link. Or any opposition while we're on live, and you can obviously bring this up offline too. So that's basically it.
Probably have to wait for the first round of it and see if there are any issues, and they'll let us know.
Yep, exactly. I think, but this is also addressing an issue. Like I think the dev list was having some other wonky issues on getting everybody added. So this just makes it a public link that people just hop into. So.
Yeah, I know that like you have to subscribe to the dev list, and I'm sure that a lot of people end up in Slack without being on the dev list. So the more we can just make sure that announcements and other things go out to as many channels as possible, we can have the broadest reach.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll just point people to this calendar, and then they'll know where to look for the calendar afterwards.
Okay. So the major release is Python 04, which just went out, I think, Monday for the first time. We went through one RC, found a little issue, and thankfully Paco turned around a new release, so the vote is out. If anybody hasn't used the Python library, that's actually who we want to hear from probably most, just because anybody who puts fresh eyes on it may run into issues that other people who have been using it for a while may not have. So please go through and validate. If you haven't yet, you can go to the pi.iceberg.apache.org, and on that website, similar to what we have for the Java one, there is a set of docs on how to verify a release. And so you can actually just walk right through this sequence in order to do the basic validation, sums, license check, things like that. And then if you're not familiar with it, it would be a great time to get involved and just set it up, get a configuration going for one of your catalog implementations, and start playing around with some of the functionality. The more people we can get eyes on it, the better we'll have a chance of finding any issues as we do these releases. We already talked about one of the items, but there is a whole list of features that came with the ODOP 4 release. Baco, I don't know if you want to just run through them really quickly. I'm just looking at the email that you sent out for the RC, but you might want to just walk through the bullet points and just share what we put into the ODOP 4 release.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Dan, for finding the bug yesterday. It's always good to catch him before releasing them. We have to do press release again. Yeah, so it's a huge release. I think the biggest ones are like positional deletes, and that we have the first step, so like updating the table. That's like a first step to also having writes, which is up for the next release. Yeah, so in 0.3 you could only read like data with PyArrow. Now it's also possible with Iceberg. We have like a head operation, so sometimes you just want to inspect like a table, but not like fully do a select star on it. So you can actually have like a limit, say like give me the first 20 rows, and then we'll actually also do the optimization, so you don't do too many calls. We had some performance improvements in PyArrow. That's actually resulting in less calls to your object store, which speed up the queries. We now have like metrics evaluation. So the column metrics that are provided by Iceberg are also used when do the query planning in PyIceberg. We have SQL style filters that actually had a bug yesterday, where you don't have to import like all the Python classes like greater than. You can just do like a string with like a SQL expression, like everyone is used to. There's a signer v4 support. It's for if you want to do AWS authentication. The docs that we're looking at are going to be completely different, like after the release. There was a lot of community effort on like improving the docs, which is always great. And we also have like a new theme, so it looks very slick. I think that's mostly it. A lot of very small bugs from a lot of people, so it's always great.
Yeah, so this definitely is a really great release, and goes a long way in terms of improving both like the usability on the read side, opening it up for tables that have the positional deletes. If you haven't played with it, like there are some really nice integrations for getting data into pandas, getting data into DuckDB. So if anybody's joining the hype and wants to go test that out and play around with DuckDB, it's really quite convenient. I don't know if we have examples in the docs, Paco. Do we have those for like the DuckDB? Yeah, we do. They're in the docs as well. So definitely go play around and do some validation on the release and provide some feedback. We'd love to hear it. Next, I would say, like, looking forward a little bit as to what's going into the ODOT 5. Paco, you may want to share just kind of what the main effort is, but I think at a high level, it is starting to support some of the write path. So metadata operations, schema writes, potentially adding manifest writes and other things like that. Paco, do you want to speak to that just briefly?
Yeah, you already mentioned it. So the three big things there. First, being able to write like the manifest, so updating the manifest and writing it back to the file store. Writing metadata, so writing the metadata JSON, updating for example, the snapshot, writing it back to the file store. We need to implement that and make sure that this is properly tested. Also, we're planning on building like integration tests with Spark there. Writing manifest, of course, very important. Actually, this work being done by Max on the open source from IBM, which is really cool. And third is like metadata collection. Yeah, we looked into hooking into Arrow in this for the first version, and it's actually the metadata is already collected, except the non-values. But I think we can live without these for first version. I would like a PR on the Arrow side to also add this at some point, because also NAND statistics are being added to Parquet, so it's also a nice thing to jump on. Yeah, and I think also we see also Iceberg being used like for like command line things, and I think also like altering schemas is also very nice with just by Iceberg. So it's also there's an open ticket, and that's also something that's being worked on.
Yep, that'll be a great set of features. You know, we've already seen a lot of people picking up Python in terms of just reading data, but also, you know, inspecting metadata. And, you know, I think that once we close the loop on being able to update schemas, a lot of orchestration of things will be unblocked, especially in frameworks that are, you know, Python based. So that's a really good direction. With that, let's jump into the discussion items. I don't have names next to a couple of these that people put in, so is somebody here to talk about the Bloom filters manifest?
Yeah, I put the first two. Those are mostly coming from the new papers in the SIGMOD, the conference that happened last week. And in the conference, there are lots of course, papers regarding different optimizer rules. But regarding the storage side of things, these two are the interesting things we might be able to consider in the storage layer in Iceberg. So the first one is about the filter support. We have been so the Parquet Bloom filter support has been added for quite some time now, but I'm interested to know what we think about just adding the Bloom filters inside the manifest file. And also, in addition to Bloom filters, there are also other filters like the cuckoo filter or quotient filter, and there are a few other filters proposed in the conference. So the primary goal is really to improve the point query performance. For example, we could enable this for tables with row identifier, aka the primary keys. So people, when query against a primary key column, they can directly know what files should be queried instead of going through all the partitions and min-max values. And for this type of filter, the data size also typically bounded, so you won't have the issue like inflating the manifest file too much. So curious to know what we think about adding this kind of index in the manifest file.
I think that's definitely an interesting thing to explore. You know, one of the biggest challenges with Parquet and Bloom filters, or Bloom filters in general for a data set, is like both the configuration, knowing which columns you actually want to produce Bloom filters for and what is actually going to be valuable. And so that takes, from a data engineering perspective, a lot of effort to figure those things out ahead of time and then adjust your data set accordingly. So I really like the idea of thinking about things like, you know, primary key or maybe a sort key or something like that, that somebody has already made an indication that like, hey, this is going to be used in a certain way, and then constructing, you know, any sort of filter on top of that. I think the larger question is, you know, where would those things live? Is that, you know, something that we would do at like a puffin layer where we have a sidecar with this information that you can occasionally use if it's, if it's fresh. Alternatively, like storing data in manifest, but then there's always these questions of how does that overlap with deletes. I think largely it's okay, just because ultimately you're just checking to see if you need to skip those operations, and I think that aligns pretty well with the delete side of things, because ultimately like a false positive doesn't really hurt you in that sense. Have you looked into, or do you actually have any of the links to the Sigmod papers, or do they allow you to get access to those?
It's kind of a mixed bag because some of the papers have public access, some don't. But I think puffing is also a good point because, for example, there was a paper published by VMware. They have a RSM tree based database, something similar to HBase, and they did an improvement, which is essentially instead of storing the Bloom filters in the files, they store like a map, which is a pointer of files to the filters. So you avoid the time needed to open the files to read the filters and then check if the filter applies. So you just read that mapping in the whole and then apply the filtering. So that mapping could potentially be an addition to the puffing spec. But at the same time, because we already have the mapping, which is a manifest, so it might also be more efficient just to store the filters in the manifest, because that you save the cost of storing the file path 2 times, 1 time in the puffing file and 1 time in the manifest.
Then I guess the other question is like, would we be able to leverage the Parquet Bloom filters? Because ultimately, if you're setting the Bloom filters on the actual Parquet files themselves, you lose a little bit in that you will probably end up having to touch more Parquet files. You won't be able to print out as much during the planning phase, but that seems like potentially an opportunity to improve, at least initially, before we would do something in metadata explicitly. Have you looked at that at all? Like just passing down the actual Bloom filter configuration to the Parquet files and have them constructed for the files themselves.
Yeah, that's actually a benchmarking we are currently verifying, just to enable the primary key Bloom filters in the Parquet files. But I mean, in theory, if we move the Bloom filters to an upper level, then you of course save all the cost for opening the files. And when there are lots of files, that's a huge saving already. So it's so we can verify we are verifying the performance at this moment. But suppose we have some improvements, then moving it to that layer is kind of a guarantee to save some additional cost.
So with your thinking that like the approach would be to take the Bloom filter that's produced for the Parquet, and I'm actually not clear, is it at the row group level in Parquet? The Bloom filter applies for the entire row group, or is it just for pages? I assume that it would be for the whole row group. Page level Bloom filters would be nuts.
Pages too much.
So, so would it be like taking the ones that are produced from the Parquet file and just like adding them to the metadata, or are you thinking like constructing? Because you could imagine like similar to how we grab stats out of the Parquet file, you could just grab the Bloom filters and then store them in the metadata. So you would actually have potentially multiple Bloom filters per file, because multiple row groups per file. Or are you thinking like you would construct separate Bloom filters just at an Iceberg level?
I think, at least in my mind, at this moment, it would be good to just have a file level Bloom filter, because there's going to be a ton of row groups, and there might be a lot of row groups, especially if we are moving to a smaller row group size for some other optimizations. So it might be more beneficial just to store one Bloom filter per file in Parquet. And at the same time, as you've seen in the way I was writing this, there are also other type of types of filters, which seems to be more efficient than Bloom filter from time, so space and performance trade-offs. So that is something we are kind of experimenting right now.
Yeah, I think that it would be great to see some of the results of the experimentation, because like one of the challenges that we always see with Bloom filters is, especially if you're working with larger data files, even if you have like a relatively low false positive rate, if you have lots of records in there, it very easily ends up with like you end up mostly reading most of the files anyway. The amount that you can actually prune out kind of diminishes with the amount of like uniqueness and total number of values. So that's where like you may actually see with primary key being what you're Bloom filtering on, that it actually doesn't provide as much value as if it were something that had like a lower cardinality. But I think experimentation would be great in terms of like providing some sort of evidence that, hey, this is actually valuable and we should introduce something like that.
Yeah. Oh, I see Ryan joined.
Yep, Ryan just joined. So welcome, Ryan. So I would say first things, like if you do have any resources that you can get from the Sigmod papers or anything that's publicly available, if we could share some of that, or like get either an issue posted or just in the discussion doc about like what experiments they did. And then if you're internally looking at some of this stuff, anything that you see, it would be great to follow up next time and just see like, what were we able to demonstrate.
Yeah, that's cool. Let me put up a thread in the dev list with all the papers and also the result. We should be able to get it like in the next few days to see how we can proceed forward.
That sounds great. The next one, I think, Jack, you said you put up here as well, which is priority.
So the next interesting paper I saw was in the transactions track, and it's about priority-based commit with optimistic concurrency control. I remember we had some discussions about that in the past. Like there's a very common scenario which you want to assign different priorities to different operations, and you want one operation to win over the other one when that operation is of higher priority. But I think for example, I remember in Tabular you already do something like you roll back the compaction commit when it is conflicting with a override. So it's kind of the same thing, but I'm curious to know what the community think about extending this to just a broader framework about doing like allowing people to assign priority to arbitrary operations. How valuable would that be?
So it's something to me that sounds valuable, but we've not had so far a proposal that is technically viable. So I'm a little skeptical that we would be able to have a common view of priorities and also have a commit protocol that takes priority into account but is also safe. And that was the problem with the last one, like upgrading from one commit protocol to the next and relying on everyone to not just say, I'm the most important, I don't care, is a really big challenge. So if there's a technical path forward, I think that we would probably all support it. I'm very skeptical that there's a technical path forward.
So I would also add, like first thing is if there were examples or papers or some prior work that shows like a viable structure for how you do this in an existing system, that would be a great reference point for us to like look at and think about like, well, how might we similarly incorporate like priority-based commit? The other side of it is actually like even the rewrite operation. So just to give a little context of what Jack mentioned there, any rewrite operation you can technically roll back just because the actual data does not change in the rewrite operation. It's just the physical layout and the structure of the metadata that's changing. And I think that actually gets us a really long way in terms of the contention we see most people having. Like if you look at the discussions in the Slack thread, most people are running into challenges or they're running some sort of like background activity, like a compaction or something like that, to rewrite data files. And that's what's ultimately causing some sort of conflict. The other places where people are having, any sort of contention, either they're doing operations that, probably wouldn't benefit from priority-based commits because it's like, hey, you've got like multiple appenders and you've got just too much contention because you have too many writers or something like that at too low of a frequency. So it would be great to kind of identify, well, what are the use cases that like priority-based commit would actually solve that are outside of one of those other two? Because I do feel like the rollback of rewrites is probably going to go a long way.
Yeah, that's true. Speaking of that, I think there's still the PR that has been open, I remember, for quite a long time for that feature in open source. I would imagine that's much easier to implement at the service level to roll back the commit. But what do you think about adding that feature directly in Iceberg? Is that something to consider outside of the REST catalog?
Yeah, I don't know which PR you're referencing, but conceptually, like any of the catalog implementations that support transactions and can introspect the data at the right place to know that, like, hey, we're going to go load up the prior one, and there is a little bit more work involved in that, but I don't think that there's any reason that we shouldn't look at that.
Yeah,
I
I
guess
agree. Like, we should work on getting that in. I think that was pretty far away from being ready to commit the last time I took a look at it. And that was the main problem, because it should be a very simple, like, pop the stack until you hit either you're looking for or the oh, actually, you know what? Can you even do that? Because the commits are like metadata based. So if it's a different metadata file, I guess you could do it on retry. You could do it on retry. Okay, yeah, sorry. Your pop stack, you either one you're looking for or like a different commit that conflicts and is not a rewrite.
Yeah, I think the challenge that I think of when I hear that is just that a lot of the catalog implementations currently they just do a swap of the locations and they're not actually loading up data. They're just validating that, hey, we're moving from pointer A to pointer B, and in order to pop the stack, you do have to do a little bit more work. You actually have to load up the metadata file. You have to look at the history. Maybe that isn't so bad, especially if it's only on conflict, but it is something that we would need to look at. And potentially there's a way to generalize that into like the base Metastore catalog or something, so that you could reuse that same functionality across most of the implementations that are out there. But I think it's well worth looking into.
Yeah, I think that's what I was
really have to do it is in Snapshot Producer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jack.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. I think I was saying that's kind of what I was trying to probe here. Is that, do we think this is a catalog level feature that should be in the base catalog implementation, or if we implement, for example, the Snapshot Producer, then it is going to be like in the core library, which has a bit more impact. I remember in the current open PR, it is kind of doing the thing in the Snapshot Producer, but yes, it's still a bit far away from being able to be merged. But trying to see if that's the right direction, or do we want to, as what Dan was saying, to check it in the catalog level and do the rollback there?
We can't really do the rollback in any Metastore catalog that is based on just the metadata location, because that violates the contract of swapping metadata locations if you rewrite the metadata. So have to either do it in the REST catalog where it's allowed in the spec, or do it in the snapshot producer. You know, it's not a high priority for us because we already have the feature, but you know, if it's a high priority for other people in the community, we certainly support the development.
Yeah, and I think like as we look forward to where this is going to really matter, like REST catalog, you know, as we get the multi-table commits and the then multi-table transactions, like the cost of doing rework on the client side just goes up, and so you really want to get those contended commits out where possible, especially for things like, you know, a compaction that would just potentially interfere with a large multi-table transaction. You want to get those out. So that's where I think definitely support on the REST catalog side makes sense. And there may be something that we can do in the examples that we have out there just to also encourage people to kind of go in that direction. And then we can support anybody who's interested in introducing it for other implementations.
Cool. Sounds good.
Okay, so in the last 10 minutes here, Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about documentation? It looks like you got the Slack channel linked. I think that there's been a fair amount of discussion over there about docs and improvements that we can make.
Yeah, so just wanted to make one kind of final announcement on this forum of like anybody who has outstanding docs that they are aware of, if we could just get those like kind of put into issues or at least communicated in some way on the documentation channel. I've linked that in there. I am going through and I want to basically start prioritizing a lot of this and figure out what's where we should be focused at first. And I'm already going to go through and start doing a couple of these. Yeah, just in general, you know, take a look. There's also a link that I added. Dan, if you can go back to the, just for the video's sake. These links will, if anybody who's watching this on YouTube afterwards will be able to just look in the description. But yeah, so this proposed update to the doc site is another basically doc that was written by Sam Redeye before, and basically was, you know, a couple suggestions that had been mentioned about how we can update the doc site. So thinking through some of those as well, and just trying to figure out again what's the you know, lowest barrier to entry of getting some things fixed that are going to help the most people, and then just basically going through that whole list and figuring out what's next. So any ideas that anybody has here would be super helpful. I'm still slowly building that out, and then we're hopefully going to help bring on some people to try to help out in this effort as well. So that's it.
Just since we're talking about docs, Faco, you mentioned that we got a big doc refactor for the ODOP 4 release. Is that mostly styling, or do we have any other significant changes that are going into it?
It's a lot of styling. It's also reordering like the content. We now also have like the doc strings in there, so we actually generate like docs from the doc strings, and we've been adding a lot of doc strings to the code itself. So actually also added like by doc string, which is like a checker that will actually make sure that the doc strings in the code are also properly formatted. So there's quite a chunk of new content there as well.
Nice. Yeah, and I'm also going to be trying to build out a couple examples and more tutorials around there in the coming months.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the items on the list. Does anybody have anything else that they want to throw out there in the last 5 minutes?
I guess since Ryan is here, I'm wondering, Edward, do you want to discuss the multiple transaction topic?
Brian actually just dropped.
Oh,
So.
okay. Oh, really?
You
Okay.
missed it, yeah.
It might also be a longer discussion, so it's better
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
have
I think this
more
is
time
it.
for this.
Yeah, I put the example in the draft PR that I think seems to be violating the isolation level. So it would be great to take a look and see what you guys think.
Yeah, I'll take a look and then I'll respond whenever I have 3 cycles to get back to the transaction stuff. Cool.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll give everybody 5 minutes back. Thank you for joining. And